Hi all, I'm Dan Smigrod, founder of the We Get Around Network Forum. Today is Thursday, September 29th, 2022, and you're watching WGAN TV live at 5. We have an awesome show for you today. Matterport Pro 3 camera, first impressions, including Pro 3 versus Pro 2 and Pro 3 versus Leica BLK 360. And my guest on today's show from Southern 3D Tours, the founder and Matterport 3D image specialist, Larry Gammill. Hey, Larry, good to see you. Thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome. Good to see you too.
Larry is based in the greater Atlanta area. He got his Matterport Pro 3 camera just days ago and has had a chance to do some scanning, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But Larry, before we jump into today's topic, how about telling us about Southern 3D Tours?
It actually just kind of started out of a fluke. I do real estate. I bought the Matterport camera for our listings. Other agents started asking me to do theirs. And then I had some companies reach out to me about doing hotels. And then from that, I started doing like small businesses and everything like that for Reddit and, 3D imaging. And it just keeps growing. And it's kind of growing on its own.
So how many Matterport tours do you think you've done to date?
Probably over 800.
800 Matterport tours, and that is mostly with the Matterport Pro 2 camera?
Yes.
And the kinds of categories, you mentioned residential real estate, other categories?
Hotels, convention centers, hotel rooms, vacation properties, kiosk. Like I've done Starbucks kiosk in the middle of grocery stores. Just every kind of really stuff I never even imagined that would have gotten scanned. So,
and how about in terms of large spaces? Have you done many large spaces?
My record right now is 120,000 square foot, and it's a hotel in downtown Atlanta, and that was a single model with 5 floors. So that was a fun one. It took me about 4 days, and it was during the Braves winning the World Series. So,
does that mean you were scanning from 1 in the morning to about 6 in the morning?
Yes, when I thought there'd be no traffic and everybody was up celebrating, which made it a little more of a challenge. So that was interesting.
Yeah, can't even imagine how how you accomplished that. But congratulations on such a large Matterport digital twin. You mentioned that you kind of got the Matterport Pro 2 3D camera to do residential real estate.
Yes.
With was that your business?
Yes, it's mine and my wife's together. We do real estate together.
Okay, and the name of the business is
Southern Home Management Solutions.
Southern Home Management Solutions, also in the greater Atlanta area.
Yes.
So how did it actually happen that you bought your first Matterport camera?
We were on vacation, and of course, like most realtors, we like to look at properties. So I had seen a Matterport tour in, I want to say it was in Mexico Beach. And I just thought it was the neatest thing on earth, and I love technology. So of course, I told my wife I want to do this, and when she seen the price of the camera, she said, "No, you're not." So as you can tell, I won. It was a bet that we had made, and I won the bet and got the camera, and it's been going ever since then.
Do you recall what year that was?
I want to say 2017, 2018. It was December 2017.
Okay, so about 5 years.
Yeah, I'm coming up on the anniversary.
And you've been doing residential real estate as a real estate agent for
18 years.
18 years. Congratulations, that's awesome. So for your Southern 3D tours, I heard you say Matterport Pro 2s, I believe the camera that you got started with.
Yes.
You now own a Pro 3, and what about a BLK 360?
I had bought a BLK back in March, and it was just wanting to be able to scan outside, to include that part in the tour. And the BLK is an awesome camera. But when you're working it with Matterport, it's like watching paint dry to do an outside scan. It just takes so long and you have connection issues. So I had sold it. Just actually it was a little bit over a month ago.
And what was the impetus for selling the BLK 360?
It just wasn't working. And when I heard that the Pro 3 was coming out, which is more compatible with Matterport, it was a better fit. So I was just basically taking a chance.
All right, great. Do you recall about how many scans, Matterport digital twins you did with the BLK 360?
7.
7.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that interesting, because that was probably about a $20,000 investment. Can't
It was a
imagine how
very-
that conversation went with your wife.
It didn't.
It didn't. Well, if you had
She was
trouble
not a
making,
fan.
well, you must be a good salesperson, because you made the sale for the Matterport Pro 2 3D camera with your wife, probably a $4,000 decision back then, and then you
Yeah.
made it. You somehow got the okay, or maybe you hid the receipt and didn't tell her you just bought a $20,000.
We've done well with the Matterport stuff. It's extra income. So she's fine with it. She knows I wouldn't do anything crazy. And that one was she knows it was hurting me more than it did her. To lose
All
that
right,
kind of money.
well, awesome. I think that context of 800 Matterport tours over 5 years doing residential real estate, hotels, kiosks, retail, malls, and other spaces, doing large spaces using a BLK 360. I think that's going to be helpful to actually understand the Matterport Pro 3 camera experience. So you got your Matterport Pro 3 camera, I want to say on Friday, just 6 days ago.
Yes.
What are your first impressions?
I absolutely love it. Of course, probably like everybody that gets one, the first thing I've done was scan my house just to see what it'll do. The next day I had scanned one of our listings, which I had done with the Pro 2 the week prior. And that's the one that we have on your page. And that's the one that
On the
shared.
We Get Around Network forum, WGANforum.com.
Yes.
We'll talk more about that in a moment. What other spaces have you had a chance to
I've done 2 new constructions, and then about a 4,500 square foot office building and he wanted the outside done. So I went about 25 foot away from the outside and a little over 10,000 square foot. So.
Okay, so I think I'd heard 1, 2 existing homes, 2 new construction homes,
Yes.
and an office building. So you've
Right.
done now 5 tours with the Matterport Pro 3 camera.
Yes.
Other initial thoughts?
Nowhere near the alignment issues that you would have with the Pro 2. It really, it just lines up. It's so much easier. Yesterday I had to do a vacation rental, and they're not set. They're on a classic account, so I had to use the Pro 2, and it was like going from a motorcycle back to a bicycle.
Just for clarification for our audience, you have a Pro 3 camera that needs the new current pricing, but you have a client that's on classic pricing. And since the Pro 3 doesn't work with classic pricing, you needed to use your Pro 2
Yes.
to do this particular client's project.
Right.
So that's actually probably a good, maybe good or bad for you, but good for us, because now that you had to go use your Matterport Pro 2 camera for a client that had a Matterport Classic pricing account, rather than using your new Matterport Pro 3 camera, how did that feel?
Slow. And of course, you get some of the alignment issues when you're going into small restaurant bathrooms and stuff like that, and doing closets. So the Pro 3's just grabbed it spot on every time. I mean, you can look at the walls, the way they line up with this Pro 3, and it is exact, compared to the Pro 2, which you kind of have to watch it real close to make sure you don't get a misalignment. So, but it was a lot faster. I'm averaging about 26 seconds. I've been clocking it per rotation, including it uploading onto my iPad. So,
and did you compare that to the Pro 2?
Honestly, I haven't.
But it felt faster using
Yes.
the Matterport Pro 3 camera.
Yes, considerably.
Okay, so were there other just initial impressions, just overall on the Matterport Pro 3 camera? I do have some specific questions, but I
Yeah.
wanted to give you a chance just to open-ended your thoughts.
Well, I've had to rework lighting because the light bar that I had on the Pro 2, of course, wouldn't work with the Pro 3. So I've worked out a light bar system using a GoPro and an LED. And then as far as like, mounting my level on top of it, just to make sure that everything's accurate, I've kind of had to improvise and get that worked out. But all in all, I mean, there's a lot of similarities to the BLK, but as far as like integrating with the Matterport system, it is so much faster. And I mean, just lining up, especially when you go from interior to exterior, it's seamless.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Matterport Pro 3 camera versus the Leica BLK 360 scanner camera. They both kind of do the same thing in terms of a Matterport service provider, meaning enabling you to go outside, do high ceilings, do large spaces.
Right.
Now that you've sold your BLK 360, do you have any regrets selling it?
No. Or I wish I could have gotten a better price, but they had come out with a G2 and therefore all the prices of the G1s just plummeted.
The second generation Leica BLK 360. But you were specifically purchasing the Matterport Pro 3 camera as essentially a replacement for your BLK 360.
Yes.
Because the BLK 360 enabled you to do things like outdoors, large spaces, high ceilings.
Right. And I wanted to stand out. I mean, because when I first started doing the Matterports, nobody was doing it here in Georgia as far as on their listings. And now you're starting to see them. They're becoming more common. So I wanted to be able to do exteriors to make myself stand out amongst the crowd again.
Was that the primary reason, exteriors?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll ask you the question, and this may be too basic for our audience, but how does the Matterport Pro 3 camera compare to the Matterport Pro 2 camera for doing outdoors?
Oh, you could. I'd have to use the like converting over to the 360s to the 3Ds with the Pro 2. It was doable, but it was very time consuming. And you had to be very close together and you had to watch for errors.
Yeah, I guess the way I would describe it is Matterport enabled the 360 views so that you could shoot those outdoors without having the issues of sun and a structured light camera and the challenges there. But really, I guess I would say the Pro 2 is more of an art than a science, trying to shoot outside and what you have to accomplish. So
yes.
I'm guessing the part of your decision to go even spend $20,000 on the Leica BLK 360 was essentially saying the Pro 2 doesn't really work outside, period. Right. End of paragraph.
Right.
So now that you have, so let's talk a little bit more about outdoor. You now have the Matterport Pro 3 camera. You've done at least, I want to say 2 spaces outside. Did you do more than that with the Pro 3?
Actually, all of them I've done outside.
Oh, outside. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So I know that on the forum, we have 1 space. Are there any more spaces that you'll be able to share publicly?
I can't really share those publicly because I was working as a sub.
Yeah.
Other people. And then there's clients, there's like a new construction and everything. And I'm doing scans, I'm hosting, but
okay. Well, when you can, that would be great. Yeah. And there is at least 1 sample today from you on the We Get Around Network forum that is the same property shot with a Pro 3 and a Pro 2 so that they can be compared. I want to focus just for the moment on outside. What is it like creating a Matterport tour with a Matterport Pro 3 camera outside?
You can go 15 foot, and that's about what I've been averaging. I do like a close up about 8 foot and then another one about 18 foot away. So you get the close up and further away to get the full view. And you can go 15 foot away. I do 10 foot if there's a lot of landscaping just to eliminate any risk of shadows. or dark spots.
So for clarification, you're talking about the distance between each camera scan.
Yes,
So Matterport on their website says you can be as far as 26 feet apart
right.
between scans. But that said, I guess there's some walking around experience that you're looking for.
Right.
So you've been spacing it out about 10 feet.
I'm not pushing the Pro 3 to the capabilities. I know I'm not, because I'm trying to make a product to where you can get the full effect, where you can walk around the room.
Yeah.
And also on the house, you can walk around as though you're at the property.
Yeah.
So I do it a little bit closer.
I'm going to ask you more about inside in a moment, but if we stay with outdoor for a second, did you have any alignment issues?
No, it was awesome. So,
you couldn't do the same thing with the Pro 2. That's virtually impossible unless you're really an artist doing it.
right.
And that's just because you're challenged and want to do that, not because from a business standpoint, it makes any sense to use a Pro 2 outside. But you did use a Leica BLK 360 outside. Did you have alignment issues or problems, or is it just the amount of time that it took for it to rotate?
Really the amount of time and going from the Pro 2 to the Leica, where you have to kind of place it in the exact spot and let it take over. It worked, but it didn't work well.
And so far, you haven't had a lot of experience, but of the properties you've done outside, you're smiling, big grin. It looks like you're loving using the Matterport Pro 3 camera outside.
Yes, compared to the BLK, yes. It was a very slow process, and like I said, it's the equivalent of watching paint dry. So,
and how would you compare the viewing experience of the Pro 3 versus the Pro 2? Because you did have a side-by-side comparison.
The image quality, I really can't tell that much of a difference. I can see a little bit of a difference, but it's a pretty high resolution image anyway.
I looked at your tour and I couldn't tell the difference between which one was shot with the Pro 2 and which one was shot with the Pro 3. Could you tell the difference of shooting with the BLK 360 in terms of the image quality?
Oh, it's night and day. The BLK, no matter what you set it to, you could never get the same image quality.
So really, the Pro 2 has a better image quality than the BLK 360, but you use the BLK 360 to accomplish things you couldn't with the Pro 2. But now that you have the Pro 3, it sounds like the Pro 2 is now just your just in case if I have to, because somebody has a classic plan, or at least I have a backup if my camera fails or something.
Or if somebody just wants an interior and they're wanting long-term hosting, I can still utilize my classic account for that.
Yeah. So. Okay. So I'm just trying to think a little bit more in terms of outdoors. Thinking bright sun. Did you have any issues with did you scan during bright sun? Were there any issues?
The only issue I had was when the sun, it was later in the day. So you could kind of see the tripod and the camera in the shadow. And it was pointed out to me that I was in one of the shadows. So I was told I wasn't moving fast enough, but
you learn. I think it's an interesting thing. If you have all the time in the day, then you say, well, I'll scan at noon because the sun will be overhead and there won't be a shadow.
Right.
But you run a business and you can't just say, well, I'm going to scan between noon and 1. So the reality is if you have a bright sunny day and it's nowhere near noon, you're going to have these long shadows of the camera in the image. But frankly, if you're really, you and I might care as photographers, but anybody who's buying property, they might go, well, that's interesting, but they're focused on buying the property. They're not focused on, oh, I'm never going to buy this property that has a shadow of the camera in it. Right. I think we talked about outdoors in terms of the image quality of the Pro 3, the ability to move the camera a greater distance.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I said the quality of the imagery.
Yes.
And I guess I would ask you about the data, but I think from what you've described, you don't really use the Matterport MatterPack or the E57 file.
I have clients that do.
Yeah. Have you had a client yet that used the Pro 3, taking the Matter Pack or the E57 file from Matterport?
I had done a job yesterday. It was the large job where I'd done the outside was for an architect, and I'd heard back from him today after I sent him everything. And he said that was one of the best tours he's ever seen as far as the quality.
Now, is that visual or is that the data, the scan data, the mesh?
That was visual. I think it takes a little bit longer to get the Matter Pack. So if he would have ordered it, it would have been.
Okay. So do you publish to his account?
Yes.
So
well, I loaded on mine and then I transferred it over to him.
Right. Okay. So in that case, if the architect was going to use the Matterport Matter Pack or the Matterport E57 file, then he would download it directly. You wouldn't necessarily know.
Right.
I would say probably for most of us who might need the data, the Pro 3 versus the BLK 360, I'm going to guess for the majority of the We Get Around Network Forum community, the Pro 3 level of detail is going to be just fine and not need to buy like a BLK 360, or just like you say, I can get rid of this for various reasons. Okay, so we talked about outdoor. How about indoor? I'm sorry, was there anything else on outdoor?
That's about it.
On indoor, you did the same house twice. Do you recall when you did it with the Pro 2 versus the Pro 3? Was it about the same amount of time? I know you said the camera rotates faster, the Pro 3 rotates faster, but
I spent about an hour and 30 minutes on that house with the Pro 2, and it was because of I don't know if you remember the way the bathroom laid out and the laundry room and the extra bathroom going into the garage. It was just a nightmare with the alignment issues. So it took me a little while. So with the Pro 3, when I had done the same job, I mean, I was able to do the inside and the outside, and just, it was I remember it was under an hour and 10 minutes for the entire job.
Which is actually fascinating, because I think even, excuse me, even though Matterport says that the Pro 3 is 4 times faster than the Pro 2, they also have a caveat to say, and it will probably take you about the same amount of time using a Pro 2 versus a Pro 3 during doing indoor spaces. But I think what I'm hearing might be different is if you don't have alignment issues and you're able to keep moving and not have to go back because the alignment was a problem and you have to redo a scan, that's probably the biggest time saver. It
is. Just dealing with alignment issues when you have small rooms. I'm sure if you're scanning, small rooms and doors at a 45 is just a nightmare.
So talk about that a little bit more, about a tight space, what you're describing in terms of the bathroom, the garage, the closet, and being super tight and barely being able to fit the camera through a door at 45-degree angle and somehow negotiate all that. What was your experience with the Pro 3?
It grabbed every time and it lined up perfectly. I mean, I think I've only had one misalignment. And I think it was just where I was just kind of pushing it a little far to see what I could do, and it just gave me an error and I backed it up a little bit and it was good. So, I mean, but I don't have near as many misalignments. I'm afraid I'm going to get spoiled not watching my model as closely as I'm scanning, but it does. That's where you cut down on the time.
How about in terms of standing behind the camera while it rotates? Do you do that or do you hide?
In the middle of the room, I go behind it. In a corner, of course, there's nowhere to hide.
The camera at Pro 3 rotates faster than the Pro 2. Was that a problem staying behind the Pro 3?
No, not really. You just have to watch it because you're having to stay away from not only the front, but the side because you have the rotating lens. So you're having to stay directly behind it. So,
okay. Was it obvious to you where to stand while it was rotating?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you done any jobs with high ceilings with that BLK 360? Maybe a ballroom, hotel lobby, ginormous lobby?
No, I wish I'd had it a week sooner because I had about a 20,000 square foot hotel that I had done that would have saved me so much time on that job. but it would have turned out so much better.
And I imagine also it might have had a high ceiling.
Yes. Yeah, there was a ballroom and a 3-story foyer. So it would have been great for that model.
So I think that's probably one of those other advantages of the Matterport Pro 3 camera is high ceilings, like a ballroom, a gymnasium, an atrium, a stadium, etc. And you actually were caught between, you sold your BLK 360, but the Pro 3 hadn't come yet, but you had that large job to do. So
well, they didn't want that particular job. They didn't want a BLK 360 because it's basically a hotel advertising their space, so they want the image quality along with the model.
So the BLK was not an option. So it just meant also, I guess, on your dollhouse view, the ballroom wasn't as nice as it could have been with the Pro 3. I want to say Matterport, since they say the camera can be moved 26 feet, that implies that the data will see 26 feet. They actually say on this, whatever this E57 file is, which is really matters to an architect, for example, the camera will actually see 330 feet. So essentially what that means is there was probably in that ballroom, it was not as high as a football field, but had it been, it would have captured the data that the architect would get in that Matterport E57 file. Will you ever get to go back to that hotel and rescan it, or do you have a desire to do that just personally because you want to see? Or
well, from what I understand, they're planning on remodeling it next year, so they told me that I'll probably come back, and that happens a lot.
That's awesome. That's very exciting. And had you had your Pro 3 to do the hotel instead of the Pro 2, what would have been the problem solved or the advantages of the Pro 3 from your perspective for that project?
Time. With a hotel lobby on a common area, you have foot traffic. So you really have a very short window where there's not a lot of people coming through. So I could have probably done that one in probably 2/3 of the time that it took. So I think I had about 4 hours invested in that. And I believe I could have done that one in about 2.5.
That because the camera is that much faster.
That much faster, and the spacing, because I was having every 6 foot versus with this one, I could have probably done 10 to 15 foot on the
10 to 15. And then do you happen to use a dolly?
I don't use the rolling dolly just because a lot of the times where I'm scanning, there's multiple levels and it would just be
okay. How about in terms of weight? Matterport says the camera is 35% lighter.
Yes.
Did you have any sense on your smaller? I guess where I'm thinking about is on doing this large hotel and you're constantly picking up your tripod with a Pro 2, you're building muscles here. Maybe you want that or don't want that. But
it's not that heavy.
But and from my perspective, it's somewhat heavy. So having a third the weight, it sounds like it would be a plus doing a large space where you're constantly picking up the camera and moving it.
Yeah, it is noticeably lighter. It's noticeably smaller as well. I think the funny thing is I was so accustomed to grabbing the handle of the tripod just for fear of the Pro 2 dropping. With this one right here, I don't have a handle to grab onto, so that's an adjustment just because I'm a creature of habit.
So are you grabbing? Are you grabbing on one of your tripod legs? Are you grabbing just below the camera?
Just below the camera and the leg.
So is it above the leg and below the camera?
Yeah, it's the adapter that they have that you can do. I grab it by that.
So that's what you're holding it by.
Yes.
Does that feel secure?
It does, but it's a brand new camera that would take forever to replace. So I'm like overly cautious with it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about, is it designed to, that's where you pick it up and carry it from?
That I don't know.
Okay.
But I would assume so just because it's about the size of your fist.
It's interesting. Okay, well, maybe have to reach out to Matterport and ask them their opinion on that, because I'd be a little bit concerned that might put a lot of torque of holding it with constant repetition to cause a problem as opposed to grabbing the tripod.
It seems like a very strong.
Strong.
I
Okay,
mean, because you've seen the pictures, in the rotation, it looks off balance,
yes.
but it's actually, it holds it pretty well. It's just a little awkward at first, and it's
Okay.
it's a learning curve.
I know that one of the members of the We Get Around Network forum had posted that he would have preferred that piece be made of a different material because he had some concern about how it would last over time.
Yeah. I don't know, I could see where there could be some improvements, but I'm not sure what they had to work with too in today's
Okay.
environment.
Exterior elevations. Have you done or been asked to do many exterior elevations?
No.
So your architect had you scan outdoors.
Well, yes, he did want the outside done. So yeah.
So this is not something I would expect you to know about, but I suspect what the architect was doing was asking you to scan so that you would have scanned data,
Right.
that the architect could actually create the drawing of where the property sits on the land to show that outdoor elevation. And I think the point is the Matterport Pro 3 is capable of that outdoor scanning, hot shooting outdoors and up high, and to get the visuals, which the Pro 2, not designed for outdoor, not designed for scan data outdoors, the BLK 360, not the best pictures. And the Pro 3 solves all the Pro 2 and BLK 360 problems for doing outdoor elevations.
Yes.
I mention that for our audience because I think that really is an opportunity for Matterport service providers who've been doing a lot of residential real estate or large commercial spaces. Is it opens a door for architects that are working on creating as-built or elevations. So
he was excited about the ability, because he has a Matterport Pro 2. He's just out of state. And so it would be cheaper to have me do it here. And he was excited about the fact that I could do exterior and seeing what the capabilities were.
Awesome. I believe the 4 or so spaces that you shot with the Pro 3 since you got it in this past week have not been a large space.
The largest one, the 2 new constructions one was 2,700 square foot and the other one was 3,200 square foot.
Yeah, I'm really thinking 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. So while you haven't had a chance to use the Pro 3 for a super large space,
right,
what are your thoughts about being able to do that?
I would prefer the Pro 3 over the Pro 2. The job I had done yesterday for the architect, it totaled about a little over 15,000 square foot inside and outside. And that was trimming off the edges and everything. So it just gives a nice clean dollhouse. So I'm actually looking forward to doing a large job with it.
Okay. I guess that's the answer. You're super excited about being able to do large spaces because you now have a tool that's designed to actually do large spaces. The Pro 2 really wasn't. You could do a large space, but it really wasn't designed to do a large space.
Well, the way this one lines up on a large space, as you know, if you do a large space, if you start off with being off 2 inches on your misalignment, 50 foot away, all of a sudden it gets huge. And then you're having to delete spaces and start over again. This one is making very crisp lines and they are spot on every time.
Are you seeing that on your iPad?
Yes. I'm so used to watching my iPad as I'm scanning just to see if there's any twist. Because as soon as I start to see a twist, I stop.
Do you see that at all with the Pro 3?
No.
It looks spot on.
Yes.
Yeah.
The walls are crisp. You know how you get the walls in between the rooms? They are crisp. There's no bleeding. If you're doing a large room, you know how on the Pro 2, you would kind of get a shadow effect. As you get closer, you can see where other scans were done and it wasn't clear.
Yes, it actually gets frightening. It turns out sometimes you can still process it and it processes correctly, but you're holding your heart until you get the model back about whether there's going to be this torque in your model because it looks like that on your iPad. So maybe it's just reassuring to know that it looks nice on your iPad and you're not having that angst about whether it's going to process or not.
But especially like on a window marking, did I mark the window on the right line? You know, if you get some large rooms with window markings, you get kind of a shadow with the Pro 2.
Yeah.
Other ones, so you're hoping you hit the right one. But this one is pretty spot on.
So when you were doing all your trimmings for windows and walls and such, did it feel like, oh, this is much nicer, cleaner?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. Does level of detail mean anything for you?
Yes.
And what does that mean, and how does that translate for the Pro 3 versus the other two cameras?
It's just it's more crisp. I mean, especially when you're scanning, because I with the hotels, they want visual. With a lot of the architects and everything, and people that's doing the renderings, they want accuracy. So just everything lining up as far as the detail on this one right here, it's noticeable.
So Matterport says the Pro 3 level of accuracy is plus or minus 20, I want to say millimeters, the BLK 360 within 6 millimeters, the Pro 2 within 40 millimeters.
Right.
So it sounds like the Pro 3 is probably a really good compromise between, I don't know how to say, maybe we haven't talked about price yet, but pricing of a value proposition to say, well, for $6,000 to get the 20 millimeter level of detail versus paying the 20,000 for the 6 millimeter and not getting as nice of photography, that it kind of like, well, I'm going to say for Matterport service providers in our community, the level of detail that might be needed by architects and people in the construction space is probably going to be just fine.
Right.
And if you were ever thinking about buying a BLK 360 like you did, you won't have to do that because the Pro 3 will be good enough. Right.
Yeah, I'm very happy with my purchase. I really wish I would have held off on the BLK and saved myself a lot of money and waited. But I've been waiting for so long because it's been, you've been talking about the Pro 3 for quite some time. And
yeah.
I think they wasn't going to do it.
So, yes, I think we've been talking about the Pro 3 for actually years.
Yeah.
And like, well, what are all the features, the wish list that the community would like to see? And it actually looks like Matterport has nailed it in many ways. In terms of speed, we've talked about this some in terms of inside, even though Matterport says it should take about the same amount of time as a Pro 2, even though the camera rotates faster. I think, again, what we talked about earlier was if you don't have misalignment errors and
right.
it's and you can just keep moving at a faster pace and it rotates faster, you actually might be able to do space faster. The reason I wanted to talk about this is that many in our community really just shoot residential real estate. And my initial impression, just reading through the specs on the Pro 3 was, oh, if you're just doing residential real estate and maybe some commercial real estate, not that much, the Pro 3 is probably, the Pro 2 is probably good enough. On the other hand, time is money. And if you can afford the $6,000 upfront payment for the Pro 3 to pick up the speed, then maybe you could actually do more jobs in a day or get done with your day sooner because you're not having the alignment errors that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's pretty much, and not to mention just the ability to do the outside. And I mean, some agents may not pay to have the outside scanned, and that's fine. But I think as it becomes more common, agents are competitive. They're going to they don't want to be the one left behind. So they will start to ask for these.
So have you run into competitors in Atlanta, in the greater Atlanta area?
Not really. Most everybody that's doing scanning out here, I'm friends with, and we talk and we share tips and really work well together.
So at the very least, the Pro 3 gives you yet another way to differentiate because you can shoot outdoors, shoot high ceilings and et cetera. So price. So did you buy the Matterport Pro 3 camera for $6,000 or the Matterport Pro 3 accelerator kit for $8,000?
Just the $6,000 one. And then I had ordered 2 additional batteries and a second charger. which have.
So there
not
were
run.
things that were in the accelerator kit that just didn't mean anything to you.
No.
You didn't need the E57 things. You didn't need the matter packs.
No.
So you got 2 extra batteries.
I've ordered 2 extra batteries. They were supposed to be here Monday. And then I ordered an extra charger through Amazon, and they canceled the order and told me it would be the end of October to reorder it.
Wow.
So I will have 2 extra batteries, but the battery time is it's actually holding up better than I thought it would. So when I done those 2 jobs,
I don't recall the spec. I want to say it was 2.5 hours. Two
yeah,
and a
2.5
half.
to 3 hours is what they were saying.
Yeah. And
when I
what
had
was your
done-
experience?
The 2 new constructions that I had done were side by side, of course, and it was about 2 hours, 30 minutes between the 2 of them. And my battery was at 47%. So that was pretty impressive. I was actually expecting to be down to 20% and be sweating bullets, but it actually done well. So.
Are you going to return the 2 batteries that you bought that haven't showed up?
Nope. I'm going to keep them because
Okay.
it's always good to have one. So.
Yes, I plus if you're doing large spaces, you're going to need it. So I think that's it. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I think that's one of those great things that Matterport did on the Pro 3 was to be able to have replaceable batteries so that you could swap them in and keep scanning.
Right. On that large job, I was limited each day to the battery. And of course, you can't plug up the Pro 2 and charge it while using. This one right here, I'm going to have an extra charger so I can charge on site and be running one and have a charger at home. So I'm not having to move the charger back and forth.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. I think that's a great point. You might put one in your car, like with one of those adapters in the car. Price. So $6,000. Was that, from your perspective, was that a lot of money, a little money, just right?
Not really. After buying the BLK, it was a breeze writing that check. So, price-wise for what it does, actually, I think it's a pretty good price. We all would have loved it to be cheaper, but.
Yeah, I mean, my impression, Larry, is that Matterport, this is just my impression, maybe selling it at cost because it doesn't need to make money on the camera. It makes its money on hosting, processing.
Yeah.
It makes its money on add-ons, these matter packs, the E57 files, the floor plans. So, I think in part that it really wants to enable as much scanning as possible. And if you're Leica, you really probably had to make your money on the camera. You couldn't just like take a loss on everyone or break even. But I think Matterport's uniquely positioned in that they could charge, which I think is a very reasonable price of $6,000, and maybe not make money. I don't know, maybe they do make money, but I'm thinking, not make money, but make all the money on cloud accounts and all the add-ons that exist today and will exist, and all the other fees that they get from Matterport partners related to the use of the API and SDK kit. So from your perspective, since you literally wrote a check, was it close to $20,000 that you spent?
For the BLK?
Yeah.
By the time I'd pay taxes and everything, it was $21,800.
$21,800.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
how did your pitch go with your wife? You probably didn't even talk to her. You just.
No, we talked about it. And she was just like, she goes, you know what you're doing. And
yeah.
And
plus you were going to pay for it by selling your used camera anyway, because presumably hopefully you got more than the cost of the Pro 3. I won't ask you, but hopefully it.
Oh yeah. I did. Everybody told me I did well with it, but I mean, and the gentleman that had bought it was amazed at the condition of it.
Yeah.
And he was excited.
Less than 10 scans.
Yeah.
So price, from your perspective, it was a no-brainer.
I had decided if it was under 10 grand, and me and her had talked about it. I said, if it's under 10 grand, I'm buying one the very second it comes out. So I'd already decided to buy it.
So when did you buy it? So Matterport announced it on, I want to say on
August 30th.
And that was a Tuesday, I believe.
Yeah.
And how soon after it was available did you buy it?
I saw it at 8 o'clock and I had ordered it then. So,
right at 8, and
yes,
you got it.
yes.
Because I know there's many Matterport service providers that have placed orders through various channels and are still like hoping to get it.
Well, you had on your page, or y'all had talked about a gentleman had reached out and talked to them about the Amazon differences versus there. And I had reached out to Matterport and asked them, and they said they'll go ahead and basically ship it out. And, it took about a week to get here from California, of course, but they went ahead and took care of me on. So.
All right, good. So do you anticipate that there's going to be projects that you'll be able to charge more for because of the Pro 3 versus the Pro 2?
I'm keeping the fees the same.
Yes.
Long-term hosting, I'm having to work on a different model.
Okay.
But I think the ability to do exteriors, I'm not going to charge as much for exteriors as I do inside, but I think that opens the door. I'm trying to find a happy balance between it being profitable and marketable.
Okay. Do you think that you'll end up doing more business as a result of the Pro 3?
Yes, it's already started. The architect that I spoke to, it was specifically just because I had the Pro 3. So because he needed the outdoors, he couldn't engage you to use the Pro 2 because the scan data actually, even if you were an artist to get the scan outdoors and maybe use the Matterport Cortex and convert it, the scan data would be a train wreck for what the architect actually needs. Yes.
In the spatial data. So how did that client find you so quickly?
Through a mutual friend of mine. He's another gentleman that does scans, and he had just told the guy to reach out to me that I already had the camera and that I could help him out. And awesome. I was in the market. So like I said, I've got friends that do this, and we all kind of network and just we look out for each other and share tips.
Okay, good. So is there categories of business that you anticipate being able to get? I'm going to say that architect was actually doing an outdoor elevation. Yes. As part of what was happening. Are there other categories of business that you think you might get because you have the Pro 3 now versus using the Pro 2?
Hoping to get into insurance. Like with disaster when we're doing homes where you can not only do the inside, but you can also do the outside. So insurance companies can use it for that right there. Okay. So I'm kind of hoping for that. Okay. I mean, I would really love to just do insurance companies, architects, and hotels and stuff like that, just doing commercial versus residential. Just because, as I was telling a friend the other day, in residential, people will leave stuff out and you're having to move it, because there's just items you don't want.
Are you going to fire your wife? Because you've been doing her scans for.
That would be too costly. I will always do hers. I am committed on that.
Okay.
And I've got several agents that I do it for that I'll take care of.
If Wendy, your wife, Wendy Gamble, is watching, good news, Wendy. Even if husband Larry migrates out of doing residential real estate, he will always continue to do Southern Home Management Solutions listings, and that's southernhomesmanagementsolutions.com. If you want to check out Wendy's business in the Douglasville, Georgia, Dallas, Georgia area. I'm going to think that there's 5 categories that you're going to get more business, that whether you know it or not, it's just going to happen. Yeah. And the 5 are as-built, construction documentation, outdoor elevations, which you just did your first, facilities management, and space planning.
I agree with you. I could definitely see that.
So on the as-built, I think what's going to happen is more architects over time, more general contractors over time are going to work off of the spatial data in that E57 pack of Matterport, or the Matterport Matter pack, in order to construct a 3D model to begin the renovation. Right. And I think that Pro 3 is going to do that.
I have sent the data over to one of the companies that I contract for. I do like as-builts, and then I have to do the laser scans, and I sent them over the data on one job that I had done so they could just analyze it and see if it'll work better, because it'd be nice just to be able to do a scan and not have to take laser measurements. of
Have
everything
you
for an
have you
as-built.
heard back from them yet?
Not yet. I just sent it to her this morning. She was out of town on
Okay,
vacation, so
so is that for, yeah, and that's for an as-built.
yes.
So that you already have an as-built client, but
Yes.
I'm hearing you're doing some manual measurements in addition to the Pro 2, which is probably so your client can scale the model correctly.
Right.
And that maybe you'll get out of the manual measurement business if you could use the Pro 3 and your client can use the measurements. And I
Right.
think the answer is yes. So
That's what I'm hoping for.
maybe you'll post in the We Get Around Network forum on what you learn on that. That
Yeah.
second one was construction documentation. Are you doing any weekly, monthly construction documentation?
Haven't gotten into that yet.
Okay, I
But,
think that's going to happen because
yeah.
that, again, that Pro 3, between the speed of capture, the reliability, not worrying about the misalignments. The other thing is, when you start doing construction documentation, you can begin where there's no roof. So now you
Right.
have sunlight. As soon as you got sunlight, you got a problem with the Pro 2. So I think that Pro 3 is going to solve that. In facilities management, have you done any commercial office spaces where you had the MEP space, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing space that you were doing
Yes.
for commercial office building?
Yeah, the same company that I do the as-built for, they've had me do those jobs as well.
Okay, so that's great because I think you've been doing the Pro 2 with those.
Yes.
So I think the advantage of the Pro 3 is they'll actually have the benefit of more accurate data collection. And then in any of those MEP spaces, have you had any high ceilings?
I've had a couple, but most of the time it's usually like small office buildings that's getting remodeled,
Yes.
getting repurposed, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Okay. I think of that as being an as-built. Space planning. Where I see this happening for you is when you're doing all these hotels. At some point, the hotel's clients that come in and do conventions or booths, they got to do measurements to figure out, will 27 10 by 10 booths fit in this space? Will the stage fit here? And kind of old school, what happens is people come out with the laser measure, client flies in
Mhm.
to measure the space to figure out the stage, the signage, the booths, etc., where you already, using your Pro 3, are capturing all the measurements in 3 dimensions. And I just can't imagine in the future people are going to want to fly in when they can just go to the Matterport model and take accurate measurements for the purpose of space planning.
Right. One of the companies I actually capture for, just as a subcontractor, that's what they do, is on the convention floors or banquet halls. They virtually stage them and for the clients, and that's how they sell the space, is by doing it out there. So I mean, there's one company, they're already ahead of the curve on that. So I think the Pro 3 will actually work better for them.
I think so. I think one, in terms of for that client, are you doing manual laser measurements too, so that they can scale the model just in case?
They're not having me do those. They're just having me do the Matterport tours, and then they're just like virtually staging the properties.
Yeah, so I think space planning, I think it's great because the 5 categories I think I've mentioned, all but one of them you're already doing that.
Right.
As-built, outdoor elevation, facilities management, space planning. I added construction documentation because I think that's going to be big. And then you mentioned insurance claims. And then the other side of insurance would be documenting a space for the purpose of insurance underwriting.
Yes.
So I think with your Matterport Pro 3 camera, there's going to be a lot of opportunities coming your way because of that camera, because you did invest in it.
Right. And I feel like it's a good investment. I mean, it's, even if my business doesn't grow any more than it's doing now, I'm still happy with the fact, just with how much easier it works. It's less stressful, just the precision.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing because a lot of times you look at things and you say, okay, Matt, even your pitch probably to Wendy on this is we're going to make money, we're going to save time, we're going to accomplish more, something like that. There's
Right.
three things. But what you didn't tell her, which is one of those extra benefits, it's just making your life easier because when
Yep.
you get into that, like you were talking about, the tight space with the bathroom, bedroom, garage,
Right.
it was all such a tight space, like you get all these crazy misalignment errors and you're kind of going, oh my God, this is not fun. And
Right.
and now you when you rescan the same space with the Pro 3, you had none of those issues. So it's actually making your life easier.
Yes.
That's
I
awesome.
have zero regrets of purchasing it. I wish the plans would have worked a little bit better, but
I'm sorry, you wish the
the classic plan would
the classic
work a little
plan.
better.
Okay,
That's a topic.
different show. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that on a different show. So Larry's company, Southern 3D Tours, the website www.se3dimaging.com. In the We Get Around Network forum, you'll see Larry posting with @Gamel Larry. So I guess he's got his last name, first name backwards there. So it's @Gamel Larry. Larry, before we say bye, is there any if I was a Matterport service provider and I'm on the edge of my chair and I'm thinking about buying a Matterport Pro 3 camera, is there any reason not to go forward?
Not that I could think of, unless you're just doing long-term hosting and you have a classic plan. If all you're doing is interiors and you're doing long-term hosting, the classic plan will work and the Pro 2 will work. If you want to expand and be able to have the ability to do exteriors and just opening up new doors, it's a worthwhile purchase. So that's about the best way. I know there's a lot of people that's on the fence and a lot of people are saying they're not going to buy it. And to each their own. So
it doesn't sound like you were on the fence at all since you placed your order. It sounds like within minutes of it actually going live.
right. I had decided with the leaks that we had seen, when I seen the spec sheet on the leaks, it
Yeah.
was a given then.
When you were reading the We Get Around Network forum.
Right.
And you saw one of our members had posted that one of the Matterport official
It was in Europe.
distributors of the camera kind of jumped the gun, posted
Yeah.
their page, and I screen grabbed the page immediately, published it in the forum, and it was
Yeah.
all the specs on the camera.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that was missing was the price.
Right. And I think a couple of weeks later, somebody had released the price and we had, I'd shared that with you, and it's pretty much spot on. So I'd made my decision a while back because I've had zero regrets with buying the Pro 2 and getting into it. It's just turned into its own business and I'm having fun with it. And so I figured the Pro 3, I kind of felt like it would integrate better with the Matterport system than the Leica. So it was a given. If it was under 10 grand, it was a guaranteed sale. So
Awesome. Larry, thanks for being my guest on the show today.
no problem.
We've been visiting with Southern 3D Tours founder and Matterport 3D image specialist, Larry Gamel, in the greater Atlanta area. I'm Dan Smigrod, also in the greater Atlanta area, and you've been watching WGAN TV live at 5.